So let us tackle the problem of actually crafting items now then. So we have in the widget for crafting, we have a button, the craft button. We have not created an event yet, but let's create one for the on click. Now this is where we want to have some things happen. And we could have chosen to have the logic in the widget, but it makes more sense to have crafting related logic in the recipe book where it's sort of like related, right? So that is what we're going to do. We are going to send the message from the widget to the character, and the character is going to handle what to do with it. So we start off with getting owning player to get its pawn, controlled pawn, like so. And then we want to have a function to send some information to. We don't currently have that, so we're going to add one. We do have an interface called BPI crafting, which seems reasonable to put this in. So we'll open this one up. We'll create a new function. We'll call this function craft item, or it could be called attempt to craft item or something along those lines. Because essentially what we're doing is we're saying from the interface that we are trying to create and craft this item, but maybe you wanted to validate in the actual crafting component that you are able to, like, have some checks against that you're still in a crafting area, that you have all the components, that nothing else is preventing you, like combat or whatever. Anyway, so craft item is the input we're going to be this is the function we're going to be using, and we're going to add an input, and we'll make it of the type sRecipe. So we want to send the recipe to craft, and we'll just call this item to craft. Save this. We'll go to our third person character. It already has the blueprint interface for crafting, so that's good. So we'll go to the interface grouping here, and we'll find the craft item one, and we'll right click and implement that function. Now this function, like I said, could be sort of agnostic. It doesn't really need to know, or well, the one who's sending the information to the character doesn't really need to know how you're going to be making use of this. But for us, we're going to be calling our recipe book and creating a function in there. So let's open up our recipe book blueprint component. And in here, let's create a function that we can call, or an event that we can call craft item. So custom event, craft item. And again, we will add an input and say that it's of the type sRecipe. And here we can name it recipe to craft. Going back to our character, we can now take our blueprint component recipe book, and we can type in craft item. And we want to call the function, even though it's a event. And we drag in the item to craft over there. Like so. So now we have that, we can go back to our recipe book, so we can actually do our logic here. So what we want to do is, this is the recipe book where we want to do the actual craft. However, the recipe book doesn't contain the actual items, the inventory does. So what we need to do now is actually communicate back again, saying we want to use these items. So if we take this recipe and we break it, we have the crafting components, and these ones are the ones that contain what we want to use. So let's actually start with creating another blueprint interface. We can call it blueprint interface and BPI consume resources. Should be fine. So this interface, we will create a function in. We'll call it consume resources. and it will take an input of S inventory items, because those are the ones that are items and a particular amount, just like our resources in our recipes. So we'll make it that an array, and we'll type in this as consumed items. We'll go back to our third person character, and we will make sure to add this interface as well. So BPI consume resources. And again, the actor component for the crafting system doesn't need to know where the items are coming from, so the player will be the one responsible for handling that. So when we implement this event now, we're going to be saying where should these resources come from, or how should we handle that these are being used. So what we wanted to do then is we wanted to take our blueprint component inventory, and we want to call on a function there. We want to say something like consume items. So like so, and connect them up, and then we'll go into our blueprint inventory. So this is the function that we already have then. So it will go through all of these items, and then it will find the index for that item, and then it will make sure to get that index from our inventory array, and then we will break out what kind of an item that is, how many we currently have, remove how many we need to consume to create this item, and then we create an inventory item, and then we set the array element of that index back to whatever we calculated the end result to be here. So this function is available in the inventory system already, so we're making use of that. So this is a very simple way of handling the inventory system and its amounts, because the inventory itself is very simple in this example, because we wanted to focus on the crafting part. So this is that part essentially. Now that we have that done, we can go back to our third person character. We can see, okay, this is handled now. What will happen in the blueprint component for a recipe book is that we now go in and say we want to use this interface that we just created. So we will get the owner. So that means the actor that has this component on it. And we'll send a message that says consume resources. So the interface that we had. So if it has it implemented, it will try to consume these resources that we're sending in. And we send in these resources. Okay, so that's the first step. Now we have said to whoever owns us that these are the resources that we need to make use of. We can put in some debugging here. We can take a print that says just crafting or something like that, so we know that that has happened, and that's what we're trying to do. Now, as this has happened, we need to actually make the item appear in the world. So we have our recipe, and we can from that break its crafted item, which gives us the name and the class, which allows us to use the class to spawn the actor. So we spawn actor from class, and we want to split the transform, because we need to make sure that it gets 1, 1, 1 for the transform scale. If it's combined, you get an error for this, but if you have split it like this, then it's going to be fine. The spawn actor here says that it wants a structure of item. Now this is going to be the crafted item that we have over here, so it populates that information. Like so. And when it comes to the position of where to actually spawn this, it would make sense that we spawn it where our character is. So if we get the owner and get actor location, then we have a location, a vector that we can use as the spawn transform location. And from that we can just print out some more information for debugging. We can say something like We could get, for example, the name of the class. So if we drag this here, this will be pretty clear for us what we have actually spawned into the world. And that is essentially all that needs to happen here, I believe. Let's give this a try and see what happens. So we need to pick up all of these items that are lying around here to have enough resources. Run up here, click on the wall, see wooden board, and nail and hammer. We have everything that we need. If I press, oh, I can't do that for now, but if I click craft now, nothing seems to have happened. And our inventory printing is still saying that the same is here. So we'll have to start debugging what's wrong. Let's go to the crafting and the craft button. First problem might be that we're not actually hooking this up to anything at all. That doesn't give us a lot of functionality. So let's actually do that. So we'll use the craft item message like so. And the recipe that we want to send in here is the recipe that we have as the selected recipe since earlier. So doing it like that. And we can now try this one more time and hopefully with better results. So wall, click craft, we see BP wall, item picked up wall, and if we press the print now we can see that we have an item of type wall that we have one of. We now have 0 nails, we now have 1 wooden board and 1 hammer. So that seems to be crafting properly. And you might wonder, why did it just like get picked up immediately? And the reason for that is that we spawned it where we are, which means that it would spawn like an actor like this, which has the area which checks if it's overlapping, and if that overlapper has the interface to pick up items, then it will be picked up. So essentially what we saw was a circle back to what we had in the beginning, where we spawned it so near us that we immediately picked it up and put it in our inventory. If you wanted to have like the visualization of it not being picked up immediately, you can just go in the crafting blueprint component here and set the spawn transform location to 000. 000 is going to be somewhere over here. So it would spawn here and you can see it appear there before you go and pick it up if you wanted to. Yes, so onward to the next part now then. Now that we have actually crafted the item, that's all good and fine. But what happened as a consequence of that is that we go in here, we click wall and we click craft, and we just keep crafting walls, and our details here are not updating with anything. So now if I press 1, I can see we have 10 walls and a lot of negative amounts of different resources. So we need to make sure that not only do our resources they update because we can see that it's being shown properly, but we need to disable the ability to continue crafting once you have run out of enough crafting components. So going back to our crafting widgets, what we can do is we can go to our control pawn and we type in query resources available. This will return to us how many resources are available since we've used this before. And we'll just send the message to the third person character, which in turn will send it to the inventory system. It wants to know what recipe to use to collect the resources from, so we send in the selected recipe. After that, we want to see, okay, since we have crafted now here, this means that we have also consumed items. Which means that this should give us less resources back now than we had before. And we need to recalculate how many times can we do a craft now with the resources that we have available to us. So calculate craftable amount. And we'll send in the new resources available and again the recipe that we're still trying to craft, which will return to us how many times we're able to craft this. And we can then do a check here to see if this is greater than 0 and get our craft button and say it should set its enabled state to be whatever the result of this is again, just like before. You can move this around like so. And after we have done that, the very last thing we need to do is make sure that our crafting details are actually updated. So if we get our crafting, let's see here, crafting, what is the name of this? This is the one, so it's the one crafting details over there. This one, this widget, we have created a function for, and we called it update. And we can then send in the recipe again. Say that this is the recipe it should be using against, and then we say that these are the resources we now have available to us from the query. And we make it look a little bit better. So, having done that, let's go back and see what it looks like now. So we pick up all the stuff that we have here, and we craft, and we want to craft a wall. We say craft, and we see that the different items have been decreased with the amounts that were used. And we can also see that the craft button is now disabled again because it won't allow us to craft even one more item. We can close that down and we can print out the items that we have. That's, however, wooden board amount 1. Alright, the right number is the one that we actually have, and the left one is the one that to be used, yeah. So, again, if you want to change this around, that's completely up to you. I think that is it. Let me see if I have missed something. I think that is everything. So in this episode we have now finished the crafting system. Again, it's a very easy and simple crafting system. You could easily make it in a lot of different ways or make this more advanced or better and things like that. It's not super optimized in all the places either. There's room for that as well, but hopefully it serves the purpose of teaching how this could be done, for example, and maybe some other things along the way as well. So in the next episode, we will just be going through the final system as an explanation, meant mainly for those that just downloaded the system and wanted to dissect it and maybe needed some explanations there. But if you followed along on this whole journey here, then that system might be a good summary, or that video might be a good summary for you to recap everything as well if you want to. So see you there. So in this episode, which is the last one of this series, we will just be going through briefly how everything works and functions together. So if you have only downloaded the finished project and not followed along the tutorial series, then this video should hopefully give you all the information you need to basically understand how everything works. Starting off with, we have our inventory system, and this is what's in the starting project. What we have here is, if we close down everything else, we have a structure for item. This is like the cornerstone for most of the stuff here. It consists of a name coming from an enumerator and a class, which is a pickup base class child, essentially. And the enumerator here is the definitions we have for the different items that we have in the game. And the name for the enum need to match the name of the row name in the data table as well when we create this. So there's a one-to-one match, and this is to simplify some logic and usability later on in the code when it comes to the crafting system. To avoid typing in erroneous items and stuff like that. The S item is one structure. The S inventory structure is a deep structure. It is a structure that contains another structure, which in this case is the item. If we open that up, we can see that we have the S item in here. In addition to that, it also has an amount here. So an inventory item is essentially an item, but with a quantity connected to it. That's all. And these are making up a very simple inventory system, which is fairly limited, but it's just for the purpose of speeding things up so we can focus on the crafting bit. And essentially it is a blueprint component which has some basic some basic logic in it, like the ability to add an item to the inventory, to print out the inventory that you currently have, to consume items if you call that function as well if you wanted to, and some helper functions as well here for different things. And the inventory item is very simple. It's basically like you have an item can be a unique slot, sort of. You don't have multiple slots for the same item, so you have an item and then a quantity connected to it. So if we pick something up here and press 1 and remove this breakpoint and resume, we can see that it says hammer mount 1. If we pick up another hammer, you can see it says now hammer mount 2. Now we have a wooden board as well, so now we have 2 hammers and 1 wooden board, and so on. So it's a very simple system in that case. In addition to that, we also have the HUD here, and the HUD doesn't hold a lot. It basically only holds the crafting component that we created in this series, which in turn is based like this. That's these 2 buttons here, the crafting items here. They are each representing, one button is representing one recipe, and these wooden board texts here are representing the text that describes what components are needed to craft the item that you have selected, or the recipe that you have selected. Below that we have a close button just to close down this crafting system, and below that we have a craft button which is enabled when you are able to fulfill all the components in a specific craft that you have selected. So the crafting system then, how does that work? Well, it has some basic communication back and forth between the player and the inventory system. The third person character here acts as the intermediary, and using these different interfaces, there is some communication from the different system, but also from the crafting system to the player, and from the inventory to the player, and then some communication back and forth through the player between the inventory and the crafting system. And the crafting system is built up in a similar way when it comes to its structure. It has a structure for recipes, which consists a type of item, which is going to craft just one item of this type. And it has these crafting components here. So it has a list of items with an amount connected to them, which is required to create this crafted item up here. And the DT recipes here consists of the different recipes that are available in the game. And essentially all you do is you create a row here, you name it something. It should be named the same as a item that you have created from the item enumerator earlier, which is why you have it available here as a drop-down if you have created it that way. And then it has a class here that you need to specify as well, which you need to create a blueprint for each item. So making a child of a pickup base here, create a child blueprint, and then you name it something and give it a mesh that represents it, and then you essentially have a mesh here with an area where it's able to pick up, and then there's almost no logic in here. There's just the handling of the being able to pick up, essentially. We can look at the pickup base here to see exactly all the things it has. You can see this is the code, and it's just when you overlap that area, it checks, is this actor that's overlapping me able to pick me up? If it is true, then it sends an add to inventory call via an interface. So if the player has that interface, which it does because we've verified it here, it will then be upon that player how to handle this information. And in that case, in our case, we are calling our inventory system and funneling it forward. Then we also have some debugging information here just to see what we are picking up, and then we're destroying the actor after we picked it up. So how the player handles this, if we're at the third person character, we have the interfaces here. We have, for example, the add item to inventory. So if you focus on that, you can see here we're using our inventory system component and using a function there which is called add item to inventory, and we're just saying add one of those. So in this system, each item on the ground is just representing one specific item. There's no functionality for multiples currently. Otherwise you would have to fix that functionality here and have that information channeled in that regard. But these are essentially the interfaces that we use to communicate between the player, the inventory system, and the crafting system. So moving on, that's the data tables. And in addition to that, we also have these widgets, which is the crafting widget, which represents the whole thing, where you can see that the different recipes are here as examples, and the crafting components, or the crafting details as they're called, are here. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you did not like it, leave a dislike. Leave any suggestions or comments you have down below. Subscribe and share this video if you want to see more like it in the future. That is all for now. Keep on learning. Take care.